Marcus Whitfield was 37 years old when his wife opened the bedroom window on a Thursday afternoon and threw every piece of clothing he owned into the front yard of the house he had built with his own hands. She did it methodically. Suits first, then dress shirts still on their hangers, then folded jeans, then shoes launched one at a time like punctuation. Their neighbor, Mrs. Paulette, watched from her porch across the street. Two teenagers on bikes slowed to record it on their phones. Diane did not look embarrassed. She looked like a woman who had rehearsed this moment and was finally satisfied with the performance. What she said when she leaned out that window, what she shouted to the small audience that had gathered at the curb, was that Marcus Whitfield was nothing, that he had always been nothing, that she had wasted 11 years on a man who drove a 10-year-old pickup truck and wore the same 3 blazers to every occasion and would never, in his life, become the kind of man she deserved. The small audience listened. Mrs. Paulette went back inside. Marcus stood on the front walk and looked at his belongings scattered across the grass and did not say a word. He bent down and picked up one shoe. Then the other. He walked back to his truck, set them on the passenger seat, and drove away. 2 hours later, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to that same curb. It sat there for exactly 4 minutes. When it left, the man in the back seat had seen everything he needed to see. What Diane never thought to ask, not in 11 years, not once, was whose name appeared on the building permits for 14 commercial properties across 3 states, or why her husband's phone sometimes rang at 10 in the evening from a number with a 202 area code. What happened next did not take long, but it cost her the house, the account, and every story she had told herself about who she was married to. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning that would become the last ordinary morning started the way most of them did. Marcus was up before 5, coffee on, standing at the kitchen window watching the sky go from black to the particular shade of blue that preceded everything else. He had a habit of doing this, standing still in the early dark, not thinking about anything in particular, just letting the day arrive at its own pace. His grandmother Cora had called it collecting yourself. She said the men who skipped that step were the ones who spent their whole lives reacting instead of deciding. Cora had been gone 6 years. He still heard her most mornings. The house was in Greensboro, North Carolina, a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street that Marcus had purchased as a shell and rebuilt over 3 years, weekends and evenings, with the help of 2 men from his crew and his own 2 hands. He had poured the back patio himself. He had framed the addition. He had laid the hardwood in the main hallway using a technique his grandfather had shown him when he was 11 years old in a narrow workshop off Market Street. The house did not look like money from the outside. It looked like care. Marcus understood the difference and preferred the latter. He was a structural engineer by training and a construction developer by practice. He had started at 22 drafting plans for a mid-sized firm in Durham. By 28, he had his own small operation. By 34, through a series of acquisitions, strategic partnerships, and one specific contract with a federal infrastructure program he did not discuss publicly. His firm, Whitfield Development Group, had become the silent backbone of several municipal projects across the Mid-Atlantic. The name did not appear on billboards. Marcus did not seek billboards. He sought load-bearing structures, and he built them to outlast the men who commissioned them. His personal financial advisor was a woman named Sylvia Odom in Washington, D.C. His attorneys were 2 partners at a firm in Raleigh he had retained for 8 years. 3 people at his company knew the full scope of what he was worth. His wife was not among them. He had meant to tell her. Early on, he had genuinely meant to. He met Diane in 2013 at a charity gala for a children's hospital in Winston-Salem. She was there with a girlfriend, wearing red, with the specific confidence of a woman who knew exactly how she looked in a room. She had a marketing career, real ambitions, a dry humor he found immediately attractive. When he told her he was in construction, she had laughed and said at least someone was building something real. He had liked that. He had liked her. He had asked her to dinner, and she had made him wait a week for an answer. They married in 2015, a small ceremony at a venue in the North Carolina mountains. He remembered standing at the end of that aisle and believing, in the uncomplicated way you only believe things once, that this was the one decision in his life that would age perfectly. He had been wrong, but he had not known he was wrong for a long time, and by the time he understood it, the understanding arrived with the particular weight of something that had been true for longer than you recognized. The first sign had been so small he had dismissed it twice. A weekend trip to Charleston, she mentioned, was for a work conference, a conference he later could not find on her firm's calendar, a restaurant charge on the joint card for a Saturday evening he had been out of town. The name of a man, Garrett, that appeared in conversation once and then never again, the way you stop saying a name when you realize you have said it once too often. He had filed these things in the back of his mind and kept building. The morning of the Thursday in question, Marcus had come home early from a job site in High Point after a concrete delivery was delayed and the afternoon's work was scrubbed. He had not called ahead. There had been no reason to call ahead. It was his house. He pulled into the driveway at 2:40 in the afternoon and noticed the second car parked half a block up the street, a silver Audi he had seen twice before without registering why it was familiar. He sat in his truck for a moment and looked at it. Then he went inside. What he walked into was the end of something that had already ended without him. He did not go upstairs immediately. He set his keys on the kitchen counter, poured a glass of water, and stood in the kitchen listening to the particular silence of a house that was not actually empty. He heard a drawer close. He heard movement. He heard Diane's voice, lower than her normal register, the voice she used when she was managing a situation, say something he could not make out. He walked to the base of the stairs and waited. What came next was a man he had never seen descending those stairs pulling on a shirt. The man stopped when he saw Marcus. He was younger, early 30s, broad-shouldered, with the specific look of someone who had just realized the room was different than he thought it was. Marcus looked at him. He looked at Marcus. "You need to leave," Marcus said, quietly, the way he said everything. The man left. Diane came downstairs 2 minutes later with the expression of a woman who had decided the best defense was immediate offense. She started talking before she reached the bottom step, about the marriage, about his absences, about his silences, about every grievance she had been storing and had apparently decided to spend all at once. She talked for 4 minutes without stopping. Marcus listened. His face was the same face it always was. When she finished, she said, "I want you out of this house." He said, "This is my house." She said, "Then I want you out of my life." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "All right." He turned and walked toward the stairs. He was upstairs for 8 minutes, gathering what he needed. When he came back down, Diane had already started. She had pulled his suits from the closet, the 4 blazers she mocked, the dress shirts, the good shoes, and was carrying them toward the bedroom window in armloads. He stood in the doorway and watched. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his actions. He let her finish. He walked through the front door, stood on the lawn, and looked at his belongings distributed across the grass with the same assessment he brought to a site that had been poorly managed. He picked up what needed picking up. He drove away. He was 11 minutes from his office when he made the first call. Sylvia Odom picked up on the second ring. She had been his financial advisor for 9 years and had the quality Marcus most valued in people who handled serious matters. She did not perform surprise. "I'm going to need the full picture put together," he said. "Asset documentation. Everything titled correctly and separated from any marital claims. I need to know exactly where the exposure is." "I've been keeping that current," she said. "Your exposure is minimal. The holding structure we set up in 2020 keeps the majority of the portfolio outside marital property. The house is going to be the conversation. The house I built. I know. We have documentation for the renovation costs, all materials purchased under your personal accounts before and during the marriage, pre-marital equity plus documented improvement contributions. That's a strong position." She paused. "Are you all right?" "I'm clear," he said. "That's sufficient." He pulled into the parking structure beneath his building and sat for a moment in the truck. Then he went upstairs, took off his jacket, and sat at his desk. He opened his laptop and a legal pad and began the only process that had ever made sense to him when something needed to be fixed. He started at the beginning. He did not skip steps. He pulled 3 years of joint account statements. He cross-referenced dates. He found what he was looking for in 11 places across 26 months, restaurant charges in cities she had claimed to be elsewhere, hotel points redemptions on an account she had not mentioned, 2 wire transfers into an account he did not recognize totaling $28,500. The transfers were sized carefully, $14,200 and $14,300, separated by 31 days. Deliberate, she had been building something. It just was not the something she thought she was building. He opened a new folder on his encrypted drive. He named it simply Foundation Report. He made 2 calls. The first was to his attorney in Raleigh, a woman named Constance Webb, who had handled 2 prior corporate disputes for him, with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a much older woman than she was. The second call was to his oldest friend, a man named Jerome, who had driven heavy equipment for Marcus's first crew and now ran site operations for 3 of his projects. He told Jerome what had happened and what he was going to need. Jerome said, "I'll be there in the morning." Constance Webb reviewed the documentation in a single sitting. She was 47, small in stature, with a methodical intelligence that expressed itself in very long silences, followed by very precise statements. She laid the account statements side by side with the asset registry Sylvia had compiled and spent 12 minutes in silence. "She doesn't know about the portfolio," she said finally. "No. She doesn't know about the federal contract. No, she doesn't know about the holding company structure. No." Constance set down her pen. "Marcus, do you understand what she thinks she's divorcing? A construction worker with 3 Blazers and a 10-year-old truck. And what she is actually divorcing." He said nothing. He did not need to. "The 2 transfers into the unknown account," she said, tapping the statements. "We'll trace those. If they went to the individual I think they went to, and if that individual has any kind of financial arrangement with her that predates this, we have a much more interesting conversation to have about intent." She closed her portfolio. "I'm going to need 60 days. "You have them," he said. Jerome came the next morning, and they drove out to a job site in Alamance County and walked the perimeter of a structure Marcus had broken ground on in February. It was a mid-scale mixed-use development, 12 commercial units on the ground floor, 40 residential above. The kind of project that looked modest until you understood what the surrounding area was going to look like in 5 years. Marcus had positioned himself in that neighborhood 3 years before anyone else saw what it was becoming. Jerome walked beside him and said very little for the first hour. This was one of the things Marcus valued about Jerome. He understood the difference between silence that needed filling and silence that needed keeping. Finally, Jerome said, "You know her mother called me." Marcus looked at him. "Week before last. Asking how you were doing. I think she knew something was coming, and she wanted to. I don't know. She's a decent woman." She was embarrassed. Marcus nodded. Jerome stopped walking and looked at him directly. "My father used to say you can't build a good house on a plot somebody poisoned. Doesn't matter how good the materials are. Doesn't matter how skilled the builder is. You walk away from that ground and you find better ground." Marcus looked at the frame of the building going up in front of them, steel and concrete, and the particular geometry of something designed to hold weight for 50 years. "I know better ground," he said. "I know you do." The Rolls-Royce had belonged to Marcus for 2 years. He had purchased it through one of the holding entities, used it 4 or 5 times annually for specific occasions where the optics served a business purpose. His driver, an older man named Curtis, maintained it and kept it garaged 40 minutes from the Greensboro house. On the evening after Diane threw his clothing from the window, Marcus had asked Curtis to drive past the house, not for any specific reason he could articulate. He had wanted to see it from the outside, the way you looked at a structure from the street before you decided what needed to be done with it. Curtis had pulled up to the curb. They had sat there 4 minutes. Marcus had looked at the house, his poured patio, his hardwood floors invisible from the street, the addition he had framed with his own hands. He had looked at the upstairs window, still open. Then, he had said, "All right, let's go." That was the only time the Rolls appeared on that street. He had not needed it to appear twice. 62 days after Diane filed, they met in a conference room in Raleigh. Diane arrived with her attorney, a man named Philip, who had a regional reputation for strong performances in asset negotiation. She had dressed carefully. She arrived believing she was walking into a conversation about the house, the joint account, and 10 years of accumulated shared life. She was not wrong about the house. She was wrong about everything else. Constance opened by introducing Reggie Harmon, a partner specializing in corporate and trust asset law, who billed at a rate that visibly recalibrated Philip's posture when it was stated aloud. Then she placed documents on the table in a measured sequence. The first was the full portfolio summary for Whitfield Development Group, properties, valuations, the federal infrastructure contract, the holding company structure. A net figure appeared at the bottom of the summary page. Marcus watched Diane look at it. He watched her look at it a second time. He watched the color change in her face the way concrete changed when the temperature dropped. All at once, and with a finality that could not be walked back. The second was the traced history of the 2 wire transfers. The account they had entered belonged to a man named Garrett Sims, the name that had appeared once in conversation and then disappeared. Garrett Sims had a recent civil judgment in Forsyth County for breach of contract. He had 2 prior incidents of financial dispute with women he had been in relationships with. Constance had obtained a sworn statement from one of them. The third was a document itemizing Marcus's premarital and documented personal contributions to the renovation of the marital home. Materials, labor costs, permit filings, totaling $214,000 in quantifiable improvement value. This was presented alongside the original purchase price and the current assessed value. The fourth was a letter dated and notarized, from Raymond Whitfield, Marcus's uncle, attesting to a conversation he had witnessed between Diane and a woman Marcus did not know at a family gathering in 2022, in which Diane had asked detailed questions about what Marcus's assets would look like in a divorce scenario. She had been planning it for nearly 2 years. The number she had arrived in the room expecting became a much smaller number in the next 40 minutes, shaped by premarital equity, documented contribution claims, and the transfer amounts that would need to be returned to the marital estate as a condition of settlement. Philip asked for a recess. They took 15 minutes in the hallway. When they returned, Diane looked at Marcus directly for the first time. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had just understood the dimensions of a room she had been standing in for years without ever measuring it. "I didn't know," she said quietly. He looked at her. He said nothing. Her mother, who had asked to be present and had sat in the corner without speaking for the entirety of the meeting, said from across the room, "Yes, you did, baby. You just thought it wouldn't matter." Diane looked at her mother. She looked at the documents on the table. She looked at Marcus one more time with an expression he did not try to interpret. He gathered his copies, placed them in his folder, and stood. "Constance has everything," he said. "She'll be in touch with Philip about the timeline." He put on his jacket. He thanked Reggie. He nodded to Constance. You didn't need to be a structural engineer to understand the geometry of a foundation that was never going to hold. The work was not in the falling. The work was in knowing, early enough, where to build next. He walked out of the room and did not look back. 10 months later, Marcus was standing on the back porch of a property he had purchased in Saxapahaw, a converted farmhouse on 4 acres that he had been renovating since the spring, working on it the way he worked on everything, steadily and without announcing the timeline to anyone who wasn't helping. He had poured a new foundation for the rear addition himself on 2 consecutive weekends in April. Jerome had come out and helped him frame it. They had worked in near silence for most of both days, stopping once for sandwiches and sweet tea from a place down the road, and it had felt like the cleanest version of something Marcus had been trying to locate for a long time. The garden was his grandmother Cora's idea, in the way that ideas from people who were gone still arrived. 2 raised beds going in along the south fence, soil turned and amended, seedlings pressed in with the same attention he brought to a pour. A fig tree near the corner that the nursery man had told him would take a full season to establish. Marcus had told him that was fine. He understood about first seasons. A woman named Adieze was inside. She was a civil engineer who had come to one of his project meetings in an advisory capacity 8 months prior and had asked better questions than anyone else in the room. He had called her 2 weeks after that under the pretense of a professional follow-up question that was not entirely a pretense. She had seen through it immediately and told him so, which had made him laugh in a way he had not laughed in a long time. She was direct and unhurried and completely uninterested in performing anything for anyone, which Marcus had come to understand was among the rarest qualities a person could have. She came to the door now and leaned against the frame with a mug. Jerome called. He says the Alamance project is ahead of schedule. He always says that. He said you'd say that. He also said to tell you the concrete supplier asked for you personally. Marcus smiled. He looked out at the 4 acres, the fig tree, the turned beds, the particular stillness of a Saturday morning in a place that was becoming what he needed it to become. He had heard through Sylvia, by way of professional channels, that Diane had left Greensboro. She was in Raleigh now, in a smaller apartment, in a marketing coordination role that was a significant step back from where she had been. Her firm had not renewed her contract in the months following the settlement, Professional networks in mid-sized cities were smaller than people assumed. Garrett Sims had relocated out of state. The civil judgment in Forsyth County had followed him. Marcus registered all of this with the same attention he gave to a quarterly report. Carefully, without emotion, and then not again. He pressed his hands around the railing of the porch, the boards he had laid himself, and looked at the morning coming in full across the property. The fig tree was already showing new growth at the tips, small, reaching, committed to the decision it had made to live. He had built everything worth keeping. Adeze came out and stood beside him, without saying anything. They looked at the yard together in the easy quiet of two people who had found, without quite planning for it, the right ground. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.